As you've been hearing this evening, the situation in the Middle East has further escalated as Iran has attacked US military bases. It is believed that the Trump administration were aware in advance of these attacks. Let me take you back to the early hours of Sunday morning when, after days of deliberation, the United States President Donald Trump confirmed that he had ordered the bombing of 3 nuclear sites in Iran. The strikes were in full coordination with Israel and followed a tense 72 hours in which senior White House advisers had become increasingly convinced that diplomatic channels had been exhausted. They believed military action was the only way to eliminate the threat of Iran's nuclear program.
Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
The UK's inert Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, was quick to stress that the UK was not involved in any capacity.
It was not the UK's action. We were not involved. We were clear when this began and Israel's attacks began that we were not involved, and we were clear again yesterday morning that we were not involved in those actions overnight.
And the imitation of a wet wipe, the Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard refused to say whether His Majesty's government were for or against US action.
Is the United Kingdom opposed to the action we saw on the weekend? It's a yes or no.
Well, that's not one for me to comment on.
For or against?
Well, the American activity has now happened. They're taking those steps to deal with the threat. And what we have, as a country, what we have been focused on over the past few weeks... You don't know whether we're supportive, whether we support or oppose it?
Well, it hardly makes you proud to be British. The very fact that Trump went ahead with the strikes is embarrassing for the Prime Minister, as he said on Tuesday that he had no doubt that the US would not intervene. Sir Keir Starmer said his focus is on de-escalation, as he refused to say if the UK would support the US if it is attacked.
The US has now taken action to alleviate that threat. It is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region, and get the parties back around the table.
Well, he's so boring, I almost talked over him. Anyway, His Majesty's government looks feeble and frail. The Prime Minister's statement has welcomed the destruction of Iran's nuclear programme, but is notably silent on its legality, a silence no doubt attributable to his pedantic Attorney General, Lord Hermer. It is understood that Hermer advised against supporting military action against Iran, warning that it may be illegal. However, the UK may use force to aid another state which is acting in self-defence, and the much better shadow Attorney General, Lord Wolfson, has put out a series of tweets showing that it is clearly lawful, and Hermer is just anti-doing anything. He is the epitome of the blobbish nature of current government that is ruled by lawyers and never does anything that is any use to keep the country safe. He should not be in office. He doesn't deserve his high office, and no one should care about the niceties of international law, as that would not stop a nuclear bomb dispatched by Iran falling on our heads, which is rather more important than what the legal eagles think. It's also important to remember that Iran has repeatedly threatened to attack British bases and personnel if the UK assists Israel. Iran's attack on US bases in the Middle East earlier this evening further proves the need for Britain to have a unified stance with our threatened allies. The Prime Minister and his cabinet have adopted the peacock approach, showing their fine feathers but doing absolutely nothing other than issuing fatuous messages about de-escalation. Every Christian engagement in the Middle East since the siege of Jerusalem in 1187 has failed, but it is impossible to ignore the fundamental threat that Iran poses to our national security. It is clear that diplomatic solutions have failed, and if the West does not intervene now, Iran will join North Korea in a different league, becoming unanswerable to any other power. Striking Iran's nuclear bases was the right thing to do, and we in the West must hope that it works. We should sing paeans of praise to Donald Trump and Israel for trying to make the world a safer place. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by the international journalist Hadley Gamble. Hadley, thank you very much for coming in. It seems to me this is a very important step by America and by Israel, that stopping Iran having a nuclear bomb is in the global interest.
They are the largest state sponsors of terrorists in the world. Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, all of these groups have benefited from Iran's actions over the last several years, particularly in the Middle East, in the Gulf Arab countries as well. We saw those attacks on Saudi's oil infrastructure just a few years ago, knocking global oil production off for a significant amount of time. What I'm seeing in this response from the Iranians is shaping up to be a bit of a tempest in a teapot. This was an attack that supposedly was coordinated with the Qataris, with the United States, and it seems as if it's following in the same vein that we saw during the first Trump administration with the death of Qasem Soleimani, a very muted response for Iran. But as you say, when you have a country like Iran that poses a real threat not just to Israel, but also to the United States and other countries as well, Western democracies, going full-blown toward a nuclear weapon, the International Atomic Energy Agency has said this multiple times. They're cheating. They're not coming to the table with the full deck of cards, if you will, and they're getting closer to a nuclear weapon. What other choice did the United States have? And as you've been saying, it's a bit surprising that our allies, our closest allies in this special relationship, have done nothing.
And diplomacy clearly hasn't worked. The previous agreement with Iran that Trump scrapped when he first became president just allowed Iran to get the money to fund its terrorism operations and indeed to fund its bomb-making operations.
Correct. And what's going to be very interesting, not only did the JCPOA do nothing, scrapping it with maximum pressure also was reversed with 4 years of Joe Biden and his folks in the White House talking again and again about a new JCPOA. But let's look at the facts. The Trump administration did try to get a deal with Iran. They worked very hard to get one, and the Iranians pushed that olive branch away. So what was the response that the United States was going to make there? I mean, they have said again and again that they're going to, secure Israel. And that's not something that's certainly going to change under this administration. So again, what choice did they have? What I have noticed over the last 24 to 48 hours in the response, the president's got a heck of a lot more hell, if you will, from his own people than Western observers, Western nations. I mean, even in this country, Sir Keir Starmer, in the end, couldn't really criticize it. But as you were saying, it's fascinating to watch UK politics this time around with this particular government. And, the joke about David Lammy is that he's a great foreign affairs secretary because he cares about the, affairs of the foreigners, not his own people.
Yeah, well, and he's not a serious figure on the international stage. But let's come back to Iran's response, because I think that is very interesting, that it told America and Qatar, as I've read, that it was about to send some missiles. They then seem to have been shot down. As you say, this is a very muted response, but should we be worried about other ways in which Iran will respond?
I would say you always have to be worried when we're talking about a regime like this one. Again, the biggest state sponsors of terror in the world. At the same point, what's happening in the Gulf Arab countries right now didn't even push oil above $80 a barrel, which says to me that these are countries that are very much prepared. And the markets as well are watching this, with more rose-colored glasses than perhaps the news media would want them to be. Because all I've heard for the last 3 days is, this is World War III. Donald Trump has done this to us, from the Western press generally. And of course, that seems as if it has been completely averted.
And the Straits of Hormuz do not seem to be closed, not least because China receives so much of its oil. And China is, of course, the close ally of Iran. And Iran is increasingly dependent on its allies because it has no economy and it now possibly has no nuclear arms program.
And let's be very, very clear, with the Fifth Fleet based in the Gulf, you have to remember that we, the United States, are securing Asian oil supplies. That's what we're doing.
Yes.
We have our own oil. We don't need that oil, right? That's all going to China. And the Chinese know that. So, of course, they're going to be working in conjunction with us.